Erwin, you want to take the next question, man?
Yeah. Do you have any
Let's go for
comments
it.
or anything? Or you're still in the thought?
I mean, I had a lot of thoughts coming through my mind.
Oh, I
Just
agree.
because you you touched on a lot of things, and once again, it was a very dynamic answer. Just what everything, how it evolved over time, right? Because I personally had that moment of like, wow, I made it. What the hell did that mean, right? What am I doing now, right? Um, my One of the biggest moments of having that kind of realization was making it to medical school, right? I've never seen anybody that looks like me make it this far, except for like two people. I think I've met like two brothers, one that was in medical school, one that had just graduated, and nobody from our chapter in particular. Didn't meet my first Latino doctor until I was a senior in college, right? It's the first time I shadowed one. Um, and when I made it there, I was like, well, I made it now. Um, but why am I not happy, right? And that was a very scary realization to come to because, I had convinced myself that the reason I was sacrificing so much was because somehow medical school is going to make me happy, right? Everything was going to be okay once I made it that far, right? Um, and that's what I was telling myself to kind of cope with, the things I had to do, the early mornings, the late nights. How many times I remember going to sleep at 2, 3 in the morning just to have to wake up again at 5 to go to PT. Oh man, it was rough. It was rough, and there's plenty of moments where I was just like, I just want to go home and never come back, But if my parents, you know, one thing they did teach me was working hard, right? And I think that's one thing that at the end of the day I could fall back on, right? It's just putting the work in, right? But one thing that I had to experience myself to come up with the answer was work doesn't necessarily equal happiness, right? So where do you find that balance, right? Because my parents never talked about happiness, right? They would say that, oh, family is happiness, right? Or but they would never say that I enjoy my work, right? I'm happy at my work. My work is in a way creating happiness, right? Or at least for me personally. It was always just something that paid the bills, right? Something that put food on the table. And so that's been one of the things that's kind of been on my mind personally. Is like, does I don't mean to take your question, Urban, but I
Oh,
guess
you're
I kind
good.
of got into this next segue into, does your definition of happiness also coincide with what your work is and how, or whatever you define success as, right? And the question might be a little confusing, but I'm just curious kind of like what your definition of happiness is, right? Because I don't know, I feel like, you know, that part gets missed a little bit, right? My little sister, she's about to make it to college, and I just try to tell her, I'm like, hey, I don't really care what you do, right? I just The biggest thing is that I want you to be fulfilled and I want you to be happy with the path that you choose. And if you need to take some extra time to figure it out, because all her friends have already decided everything, and she's like, but I don't know what I'm doing. Like, I'm thinking about doing this technician thing, and just because it's gonna pay good, and it's like, well, the fact that you said it's gonna pay good already makes me think that that might not be what you want to do, right? Like, you don't know much about life. I thought I had it all figured out by the time I was like 16, 17, right? And I was so wrong. So it's just like, yeah, I'll toss that over to you.
So the question is, does my definition of happiness coincide with the definition of success, or repeat it again?
Yeah, I think does your definition of happiness coincide with one, the work that you do, and also like whatever you define as success, right? But I think in your definition of success, I feel like I might know the answer, but I'm just gonna let you kind of talk about it because
Yeah. You know, I have and my viewpoint is a little different, right? It's become a little different, and I think uh, so. The work that I do, right? I try to help people, and it doesn't bring me joy. It's a very hard job. Sometimes there were people that would say, "Man, I want my kid to work with you," and then in my mind, I'd be like, "No, you don't." Because if your kid's working with me, that means that he's in the system or she's in the system, or the social welfare system, that she's in a group home, that there's drugs, drug abuse, that there's violence, that there's all kinds of crazy bad things that have happened in order for your child to work with me. And so um, I have to work with sometimes very bad things, like children that have been abused sexually by like their own family. Kids passed away. You know, Early on when I was 24, one of our kids that was in our group was stabbed to death, and I had to give a motivational speech because at that time I was still kind of doing speeches. And I kind of like went away from that. This was kind of one of those moments. My boss Mario called and says, "Hey, Chato, I know you just got off the plane, and I hate to do this to you, but I thought you need to know this. Um, you know, so and so was stabbed to death yesterday, and it was a kid that was in my group who was 15 years old, and because of the neighborhood he lived in, um, he wasn't jumped into a gang, but because of where he lived, that already had put him at risk." For violence, to be a victim of violence. And so, um, that kind of changed my viewpoint on things too. And it was like, I come into these places and maybe I tell a good story and I can motivate people, and maybe I make somebody, two or three people cry, maybe, but then I leave, and then what? Um, so then that kind of really took me away from that, like, it was more of sometimes an ego, because I'd be like, well, I'm up here presenting and people shaking my hand and telling me that I'm great. But then there's kids that are dying. Um, there's kids that are being abused. Um, there's kids that have their own stories. And so they don't need to hear my story. They need to feel, connected. They need to feel love. They need to feel worth. And so the path that I chose, and I call it a path, the guys that taught me, they kind of, and this is what they taught me. They were from the streets and had overcome all these life challenges, and it was a trip because when I was working with these guys, I was like, well, I never been to prison. Well, I never been in a gang, I never, you know, stab someone or, rob the bank or doing all these crazy things. And some of these guys had experienced these things in life. And it didn't matter though. They said that doesn't matter. What matters is how you treat people, the life that you choose to live. And that was key, the life that you choose to live, how you walk, right? And so for me, again, it goes back to walking your talk. And if you're really, there was an instance where one day um, I had a group of about 20 kids at Independence High School, which is one of the largest schools at San Jose. Um, and there was about 20 young men that were in this group, and they were all kind of labeled as a certain gang, from a certain area, certain color. And it was a very hard group. But what happened was that I was able to have these guys show up for group every week. Maybe they didn't go to class, but they would show up for group. And we would have these conversations about violence prevention, about substance use, about what it means to be a man, about identity, about healthy relationships. And so A day came though when all of a sudden there was only two guys that showed up. And what happened was that they had jumped one kid who was considered a different color, um, and they expelled, and some of them got arrested, and it was just it was a big mess because that other kid that they beat up would go to my group at the center where I worked, so I knew the kid that they beat up. Um, so it was very, as a 24-year-old, I was feeling really defeated. Like, man, I can't do this, I can't do this work. And so when I got back to the office, I remember talking to my boss and telling him everything that happened. And I said, man, I messed up. I failed. Um, and this was a really important lesson that he kind of helped me understand. And he said, you know what, Chato, you are failing and you did mess up, but not the way that you think you messed up. He said, you messed up because you had two kids that needed your 100%. And all you could think about was the 18 other that were not there. So you failed. And that's how you failed. And so um, this idea, right, is that all those experiences don't matter. But if you're able to help a person feel connected, accepted, um, then that's going to be what's important, right? These kids kept showing up, and they would ask, well, how do you define success? That was a question sometimes. Well, working with all these kids, how do you define success? 18 of them got suspended, expelled, or kids that would be referred through probation would still get in trouble. Um, but for us, success was, we'd say, well, you know what? These kids keep coming back to our group. So we're being successful because these kids have a safe place where they can go. They have a place where they can learn from men that are living positive examples. And so for me, I don't say that I feel like happiness and joy from the work that I do. Um, it's more of a responsibility that I decided to choose to walk. Um, do I feel good sometimes? Yeah, I feel good. There's times where um, I feel great because I get to talk to youth, and I get to have those positive moments and experiences. Sometimes even with little kids. I started to work with elementary age because I saw how difficult it was for the teenagers, and I realized that at some point they were little kids, and at some point they needed somebody to be in their lives. Um, so I stepped out of my comfort zone and I learned how to work with elementary aged kids. And if I had the choice right now, I'd probably still stick with elementary age um, because they need us. Um, because again, when we talk about success, if I'm living healthy, my family's healthy, then we're going to have healthy families in our community. So I'm going to try to help these kids um, have some healthy individuals. But from a cultural perspective, that's the very key point. Um, because when there's a disconnect from your cultural identity, then that's where all the struggles come, right? Um, from my perspective, from what I've learned and what I've taught, is that cultural identity is very critical because it's who we are. Um, and if you don't have that, then you're kind of walking around, and there's a piece missing from you if you don't have that. And this is what that is. It's an entendimiento, right? It's a conocimiento, un entendimiento. Um, it's educación versus education. Let me ask you guys that. Do you know the difference between educación versus education? Besides that, it's in English and Spanish.
Not necessarily, no.
Right? So in education, right, we go to read a book, right? You get a degree, a paper, you study, blah, 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 blah. But in educación, it's what you're taught, right? Those values, the cultural values, the valores, the things that are the foundation of who we are. Um, the cultural teachings that have been passed on generation to generation. The reason my mom calls all the kids mijo and mija, there's a reason for that, right? That's a cultural teaching that's hundreds of years old. Because again, in our culture, we were like that, very community oriented. We looked out for each other, because that's how we survived, how we lived. Those were cultural teachings. Uh, So the thing is that there's been a lot of different events that happened throughout the years. Everything, you know, from colonization um, to the religion and how that's impacted, you know, different communities as well. Um, we won't go too much into that, um, but yeah, there's a lot of entendimiento that we have inside of us. But man, I had to go to California to learn it, to understand. I had to do that, and then I had to. I got involved with Danza Azteca, right? I started to really delve into kind of who I was, and that became a really big part of my life. I've been doing danza for 11 years, and so that really helped me professionally. It helped me spiritually, uh, physically, mentally, so many different things. And again, these are things that are hundreds and hundreds of years old, man. Like that, you know, I think I was listening to one of your podcasts, and you were talking about a book that you read and some authors and kind of philosophy. And the thing is, man, our culture, we had that, you know, we have that, but nobody teaches us that, right? The Aztec calendar has so much on it. You know, people kind of use it as a, like just as a calendar on a blanket. Um, but when you begin to really understand it and the teachings and lessons, and man, it's super deep, way beyond anything these fools from, like, you know, Western civilization can imagine. We built pyramids and they told us that aliens did it. You know what I mean? Like when they came, our irrigation system, man, like we had poets, we had spirituality, we had all these things. And then, but the thing is, who's telling the story in history, right? Um, they would burn us, you know, they wouldn't want people to dance. So they would burn their feet. They would tie them to the stake and they would burn them. They would beat it out of them, right? So even like in a part of the danza, there's a section of it where it's very connected to the church, but they kind of helped carry on these underground secret teachings. So if you think about it, in Mexico, the Virgin Mary is very big, right? But in other regions in Catholicism, Virgin Mary is not a really big entity. Well, one of the reason is that in Mexico, they hid Tonantzin, right? So Tonantzin is Mother Earth. So they would hide it. And so their reverence to the Virgin Mary was a hidden reverence. It was remembering Mother Earth, Tonantzin, right? Very, 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 very important piece. But no one really teaches that, right? They talk about Juan Diego, and that in December, right, Dia de la Virgen, and there's this hill. People would go and they would go and pray there, right, spiritually in their own way. And so they needed to figure out, well, how can we change this? Because we don't want that to happen. So again, who's telling the story and who is telling history? So we begin to view things differently. And so, and recently, I know I digress from your question, but I'll give another little example. Is the story of La Llorona, right? So there's this idea of La Llorona, the woman who killed her kids, and she'll come get you at nighttime. And so there's different stories, but that's the one that people know. And so I'll give you a different version for perspective. And this is one that I believe happened. Um, so when the conquistadores came to the Americas, you know, they were greedy. They were horrible. They wanted to take and take and take. And one of the things that they wanted to take was the beauty from this woman. They wanted to abuse her. And because this woman fought back, and we're seeing a lot of this that happens, right? The genocide that's happening to women in Mexico. Women are dying at very high rates, being murdered. And this has happened for years. And we see here in the United States with the Native American population as well, missing and murdered indigenous women movement as well. But so what happens is that this conquistador, they want to abuse this woman and she fights back. And because she fights back, they murder her husband. And what they do is they drown her children. And in the process of drowning their children, they also rape her. So this woman has just experienced a lot of trauma. Her husband was killed, she was raped, and her children were drowned. And so now this woman in hysteria is saying, mis hijos, and she's crying and she's upset because all this happened. And the conquistadores would, well, esa mujer mató a sus hijos. She drowned her kids. She's crazy. Look at her. You know what I mean? So what are the stories that are being told? You know what I mean? So for me, I believe this is a story that seems more realistic to me. And so this woman would cry for the children that were murdered. When they say not only that, but for what was to come, right? The destruction of her people. So she not only cried for her children that were dead, but she would say, mis hijos. And again, referencing my mom, who says, mis hijos, or all the kids that are around. She's referring to all the children that were to come, the generations to come, mis hijos, and crying deeply for the destruction of what was coming. And so a lot of this, right, we're verbal storytelling. So again, you know, where are we learning these things? What are they teaching us? So the happiness piece, I feel happy when I'm able to work with kids to, you know, when they begin to feel pride in themselves, that brings me some happiness, right? But it's a part of my responsibility of what I've chosen to do. So it's like a life purpose, right? And you know, I could be a social worker, I could be a therapist, I could be a teacher, I could work at freaking McDonald's. And it wouldn't matter as long as I was doing, you know, my life purpose of helping people, of living a good life. And that would make me happy. Some of the moments where I'm happiest is when I'm doing Danza Azteca. Man, that would bring a lot of happiness. But we did it for a lot of like difficult reasons. Sometimes we would do it during marches for ending the violence in the barrio. Sometimes there was somebody that was murdered, and we would go through the neighborhood, a very difficult neighborhood, and we'd be dancing with our copal to try to help bring healing. Funerals, sometimes we'd go into, you know, we went into a church and then their body was right there with the casket open and we danced. And it was because of this, there was purpose by it. You know, when you hear the drum beat, ba-boom, 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 you feel it and it's in your DNA. And so that's what we would do. We started to learn about our own philosophy, our own culture, and it begins to empower you, is what it does, but not in the way of the Western society thinking of power. It begins to empower you in a way that you have self-respect, that you have values, that you begin to heal. So it's yeah, those are the things that would bring a lot of joy. Today, I took some food to my great aunt, who's 79, 80 years old. So, you know, they were having issues in the hospital with health, and my mom wanted to cook food up. So I took 2 big bags and I sat down and we just had a conversation, and I sat there for like an hour, and that brought happiness to me. So those are the things that bring happiness. I I I had a chance right before I left San Jose. There was a young man, I worked with him for 3 years, and it was very hard because he has ADHD. Now, I don't really throw that out a lot because a lot of people do, but this kid it was really difficult for him to sit still. And 3 years of hard work, and you know, he had a lot of progress that he made, but that wasn't the success. the success was how he viewed himself, how he felt about himself, confident, self-esteem. Well, this family, economically, they struggled, and they would move from like garage to garage, having an apartment in a garage. And for 3 years, I never had a session with them in their home because mom never invited me into the home. Sometimes they would rent a room. Uh, One day he said he was really happy because somebody, the guy renting the other room across the hallway had moved out. So he had his own room, even if it was for a week. He didn't have a bed, so he slept on the floor. And he said he was really happy. He said his brother didn't stay though because there was mice that were running around, you know? And, but those are things, right? You think about it and, but he was happy and that brought happiness to him. Well, I had gone to meet the family and we were walking, you know, sometimes we'd have our sessions at a park and we'd walk and the mom says, do you want to go eat? ¿Quieres ir a comer? And I said, well, sure. You know, thinking in my mind, I'm going to pay for dinner because I know that they don't have a lot of money. And, you know, sometimes I do that. We'll go and have dinner. So I figured we were going to walk to like a taqueria that's down the street. And so we were walking and talking and the kid, he kind of realized we were going to go eat because he was like, ¿Dónde vamos, ma? And she was like, a comer. And then he looked at me and he tripped out. He was just like, you're going to come eat with us? And I was just, you know, like, no big deal. Like, yeah, of course. Why not? Yeah, I've done it before. I go with people to eat. And he was just kind of happy. And he's like, oh, okay. And so we talked and talked. And I'm talking about IEPs and this and that, and, you know, about school and ADHD, IEP. And we get to this church. And I think, well, that's different. But I guess, you know, sometimes churches, they have fundraisers and there's food that you can buy. And so I go along with it. We're walking in and we're greeted by a man with some hand sanitizer. And I'm like, all right, cool. This was before COVID. So, you know, put the hand sanitizer and then we walk into the gym. And then I realized right away as I'm walking into the gym, it's full of homeless people, right? And so this family was so happy to be able to go and get a free meal at this shelter, or not a shelter, but like I guess a pantry, right? Food pantry. And so we only had like, I don't know, 20 minutes to eat because we got there kind of late because she was waiting for me. And so we go through the line and she's como si nada, like, you know, oh, pues aquí se agarra, you know, and the kid too, he was excited, you know, and we sit down and we're eating and his little brother was with us and he was a year younger, but I could tell that he was really embarrassed. He felt like ashamed because he wasn't really eating. And my kid, he was just like eating and, you know, it was and I tried my best to like make it kind of natural, right? Like, yeah, we're, you know, and then the mom looked at me and said, or the little boy looked at me and said, man, this is so good, right? And it was like very bland. It did not taste good at all. And so, you know, I kind of teared up a little bit, but I had to like keep it together. And it was just like, yeah, I mean, it's good. So we're eating and the mom says, oh, si gustas ir ahí, puedes y te dan para llevar. And I was like, oh, pues sí, muchas gracias, señora, pues, you know. But it was kind of one of those moments, because every now and then I'll have those with my work. And, but, you know, so it's hard, right? When you ask, do you feel happy? It's a different kind of, I guess you could say happiness, right? But, you know, and that's what I would do. The kid did really bad at school, but he didn't get into trouble as much. He was doing homework a little more. The family felt validated. The family felt like human, right? When society and everyone else is dehumanizing. So those were kind of the things that I work in. That's what I try to do. So yeah, it's hard, you know. And I know people say, "Oh, if you're happy, you'll never work a day." But it's like, you know, for what I choose to do, it's very difficult. So I feel happy when I'm working and living my purpose, because I know it's making an impact. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. I know maybe it's a little different, right? Different, like again, different perspective, but Yeah.
Sorry, I'm writing something down really quick. But
You're good. I'll speak while you're writing stuff down. Nothing. That's the whole purpose of this, right? We want to be exposed to new perspectives or whole new ways of thinking. Um, because I mean, it's true. Not all professions are gonna make you enjoy every minute of what you're doing, right? It's more of the fulfillment of, I got to help someone, even if it's just today. I got to help someone, or I got to make a genuine difference in that person's life. And even like when you were talking about helping people be proud of who they are or where they come from, type of thing. I know that's something I really struggled growing up. Um, just because a lot of the activities I was involved in, or a lot of the classes, there wasn't many people that looked like me. I was in a lot of the honors classes, especially like in high school and like late middle school, and just I had to take all these difficult classes, and the farther I got up, the less people that looked like me that there were. So
Right.
at times it felt like, well, I had to try to blend in. I had to try to assimilate, for the most part, just try to be like everybody else, so that way I can feel accepted. And almost felt like my family always grew up in a I grew up in a trailer home, within just like a trailer um, park where with a bunch of other Hispanic families. And like I was never gonna invite friends over. Like I felt embarrassed of that. I felt of my parents didn't speak English, so I felt embarrassed about that. So I know
Yeah.
that whole dynamic of just being proud of who you are was something you know I struggled with. And it wasn't until I got to college and met more people like me that had a lot of the same experiences, when I was able to kind of embrace that a little bit more. And even to this day, I know it is something that I still try to work on more and try to embrace more, because like you were saying, like I never got taught that, right? Like it was never something that was spoken about, like you were saying. It all depends on who's telling the story and who's telling what they are. Because I never had a single teacher of color, until I got to college. So how is someone going to teach me something that they don't know anything about either? So trying to just embrace the people that were in my community. I wish I would have done that more, learn more from the older members in my community, my church community, things like that I know probably could have learned more from. But again, it was just something that at the time I just didn't know. I just didn't want to face that part of my life, or didn't want to acknowledge it as much, because I felt like I wouldn't fit in as much that way, or wouldn't be a part of the group as much. So, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, I think I think one of the most critical pieces um, goes like deeper. That question of why, why? And I always challenge the kids. I say, you listen to me, but I want you to always ask the question why. Why are things this way? Even me, whatever I tell the kids, I say, oh, question like, well, why is Salvador telling me these things? Why? What is the purpose? Why is it that only 2 kids graduated from South High School in 2002, and Salvador was the only brown kid that went to UNL from the largest school in Omaha Public Schools. So the largest school in the state of Nebraska only sends 2 kids, right? Why is it that my father never missed a day of work, right? Because I thought as a kid, man, he's a badass, always strong, going to work, hard worker. But why is that? Why is it? Well, because he doesn't have sick leave, right? There's no paid sick leave, right? Even during a damn pandemic, no paid sick leave, right? So, and we see the results of what's happening at the start of this pandemic and who's being affected and disproportionately. So, and I challenge, right? And I would tell the kids nowadays, even before I left, um, these are middle school kids, and I'm saying, I want you to ask why, and I'm going to ask you, well, why do you think it is? Well, what's going on? Well, why isn't there more brown teachers? And I said, well, why is it that the jails are full of brown people? Hmm. You know, like, why is it? So these questions of why, and then I would teach them about history and kind of seeing how how a lot of history continues. It's just a revolving door that keeps going. And so, but I think, like I was saying, one of the critical, I think, key points is to always ask why, but to begin to really understand the history of who you are, and not just with like who your grandparents were, but like our indigenous native population of where we are. Because a lot of what being Mexicano is, those cultural values, that didn't come from Spain. That came from the people that were originally living, and some of those populations are still alive today. Um, Unfortunately for myself, where we're from, there's no connection to that. So I found my connection through the danza azteca, right? But in reality, when I really dig into where I come from, that's not, my family's not from Mexico City, but they are from Guanajuato. So there's some connection in certain, a lot of the teachings would go across Mexico. But yeah, man, there's just a lot there. There's a lot. And we have to start asking why and digging deep. And then we begin to understand, our path of who we are. Because if we don't know where we come from, then we don't know who we are, and then we don't know where we're going, right? Like it's all interconnected. Um, so I think that's really a really important key factor that nobody taught me though, like when I was young. And that's because there's a lot of us that don't know, right? You can't teach something that you don't know. Because again, throughout history, we have been conditioned to not really learn about that, to not talk about those things. Um, so um, it's a little different in California because there's a lot of more progressiveness. So what happened, especially during the civil rights movement, the Chicanos in California connected with the Native American activists through the American Indian movement, AIM. And so that connection kind of helped them to reconnect to certain, certain aspects of their cultura, right? Because we also have that. And so I think that played a big role, as danza began to progress and come around. And now it's all over California. You have it from Northern to Southern California, there's danza azteca. And it goes beyond just being a folkloric presentation, but it's a philosophical, spiritual entity. But yeah, it's, when I was in college, man, I was a boy trying to teach other boys how to be men, you know, and that's just kind of how it was. We were trying to figure it out along the way. So now, like I said, that's kind of my idea is about, I try to help kids along the way. So that's kind of, who I am and what I do.
Yeah, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. So as somebody who would, me personally, I'd be really interested in kind of discovering more about that, that hidden, that lost part of our culture, right? The history, the educación, as you mentioned. Where should I begin looking, right? Like what are the books, and even if they're in Spanish, that's fine. Like I'll figure out a way to read it. The people I need to talk to, right? Because that's something that I'm really interested in, right? And I've been reading it from all kind of walks of life, right? I have the Tao Te Ching over there. I'm reading the Gospels of the Bible. I have a couple other books that I've just tried to pick up to discover, that why piece, right? What are the things that motivate individuals? And each culture seems to has its own piece, right? But
Yeah.
it seems kind of dumb for me not to start with that which I know, right? That which I have such a connection to.
Yeah. And what was one of the books that really got me kind of like moving in this direction, was the book Roots, right? And that has to, I don't know if you're familiar with Roots. Um, it was written by the person that wrote the Malcolm X autobiography.
Yeah.
But Roots, he looks at his family history all the way back from when they were slaves in Africa, and it follows this family tree to like, you know, present day. So you're hearing the story of like, you know, maybe 4 or 5 generations, and it's pretty amazing, right? So that kind of got me going a little bit. So there was another book called Reign of Gold, by Victor Villaseñor, that, you know, is kind of similar in that it kind of follows this family history. And so not as far back as Roots, but as I think it covers a couple generations. But it began to really help me to try to reflect on my own. And you ask a really hard question, you know, and it's not a hard question, but it's a question that um, there's no like direct answer to, right? Uh, and it's like I've been in this process for 11 years, 12 years now. And there's a lot that I need to learn, you know, a lot of things that I need to learn. I moved to California, right? And I stayed out there because of the entendimiento that I wanted to receive, the conocimiento. Um, and I've had different experiences. I've built relationships in Mexico City, and I've learned from people. I've kept an open mind and asked a lot of questions, and didn't believe everything that I heard, but you know, just would take it into account to help me find my understanding. And I still have a lot to go, um, you know. And I learned a lot through other cultures as well. So like with the Lakota culture, I've been connected to, um, you know, with that culture and that family and the Lakota uh, ceremonies, and you know, and it helps me to learn about my own history. Um, but it's hard, bro. There's no like direct answer, right? It's something that, and it's not that we're like we're remembering, and because in the process it's kind of been forgotten, and so we're trying to remember. And it's hard because we're talking about 500 years, man. 500 years of shit that happened. And so it's about learning slowly. And we're not going to get all the answers, and the answers don't come like that. So I think sometimes we want it like that, um, because that's what Western society has taught us. Uh, but it's a learning process, and it's a life learning process. And the thing about it is that I'll tell you this. Have you all heard of Pepito, the Mexican little kid Pepito? They tell stories about him, chistes.
Mhm.
I'm gonna tell you a Pepito story real quick, and it's not one that's kind of like derogatory, because I know a lot of them are like sexualized or getting into trouble. Uh, but there's this Pepito lives in a really tough neighborhood, man. It's like violence and drugs and all kinds of bad stuff is happening, and he goes to a really tough school. He happens to be, we'll say he's about 10 years old, and he decides to skip school because he thinks he's, you know, pretty badass, and he's just gonna do his thing. And so he's walking through his neighborhood, and he skips school, and um, he walks by this shop that he had never really noticed before. And he's kind of like, man, that looks weird. I've never seen that shop before. It's a small little antique looking shop. And so he decides to kind of go in, and he goes into this shop, and he's looking around, and he's kind of in amazement because they have all these like gadgets, and it's very like mystical, right? Like all these things that you can imagine. And at the end of the kind of aisle, there's like a desk, a counter, and there's an old man on the other side. And um, Pepito makes his way down the aisle to where this man's at, and he looks at him and he says, um, he's like, hey, what kind of shop is this? What do you guys sell? I've never seen it before. Um, you know, how long have you guys been here? And the man tells him, well, we've been here about forever. And so Pepito kind of trips out, well, what do you guys sell? And then the guy kind of, you know, responds, well, everything. And so Pepito's kind of tripping out, man. This guy's weird. He's about to leave. He's like, yeah, I'm getting out of here. And so he's about to head out. And the guy says, hold up. He says, mijo, go around through the store and take a look. Take a look, and whatever you like, just, pick it out and you can have it. It's yours. So he kind of like, what about, I got to pay for it. How much, or what? He says, don't worry about it. Just, pick whatever you like and you can have it. I'll tell you what you got to do. So he's like, well, I'm going to get the most expensive thing, man. This guy's a fool. So he's looking around, and as he's going through the shop, he notices that there's a box and it's kind of like glowing. And so he goes over to this box and looks inside, and he notices that it's a very it's his neighborhood, but it's the complete opposite. It's beautiful. Families are together, they're outside, they're playing. There's no drugs. There's no violence. It's a beautiful, happy place. People are not suffering. And so he runs over to the counter and tells the man, hey, ¿sabes qué? I want that, man. That's what I want. I want that. The man looks at him and says, Pepito, you don't want that. He's like, no, go. There's so many things that you could choose. Go around. You will find something better. He tells him, no. I know. That's what I want. And he tells him, are you sure? And he asks him about 4 times. Are you sure this is what you really want? And after the 4th time, he tells him, this is more than what I want more than anything in the world. And so he says, okay, mijo, I'll be right back. And he goes into the back of the shop. And when he comes out with like a little leather pouch, and he puts it on the counter and says, there you go, mijo. And Pepito kind of looks at him and says, that's not what I wanted. And he says, he replies to him and says, no, I told you, I'm going to tell you what you got to do in order to get what you want. So he says, go ahead, take a look. And he opens up the leather pouch, and inside there's a bunch of semillas, right? There's a bunch of seeds. And he's tripping out. He's like, this is a bunch of seeds. He says, yeah, mijo, I'm going to tell you what you got to do, okay? There's a couple things that I need you to do, and then you can get what you want in that box. He says, first off, one of the first things that you're going to have to do is you're going to have to take these seeds and you're going to have to go and plant them all through your neighborhood. He says it's going to take a lot of hard work. Okay. Number one, hard work, planting them. It's going to be hot outside, and it's going to be hard, and it's going to be raining. It's going to be cold, and it's going to be, it's going to be tough, but you're going to have to go out there and take care, plant all these seeds. And, he says, do you think you can do that? And he kind of looks at him and says, yeah, I really want that. I really want what's in that box. So yeah, I can do this. I'll okay. What else do I got to do? He says, okay, mijo, you're going to go out and plant all these seeds, and you're going to do that. And, you're going to have to take care of them. Okay. So there's going to be times where you're going to want to play on PlayStation, where you're going to want to go to the movies or to the beach, or you're going to feel lazy and you just want to stay in bed. But you're going to have to take care of those seeds and make sure they get watered, make sure that they get enough sun. And then sometimes there's going to be weeds that are going to come and try to take them over. So you got to cuidarlos. He says, so, it's going to take a lot of sacrifice, right? You think you could do that? You think you can sacrifice for all that hard work you did? And he looks at him, he's like, damn, man, because I'm a kid and I just really want to live and do fun things. And he says, but I really want that neighborhood like that. So he says, yeah, you know what? I'll do it. He said, I'll do it. Hard work and sacrifice. Okay. He says, what else do I got to do? He says, okay, well, he says, you're going to be out there doing all this hard work and sacrificing. And, but here's the thing. He says, the third thing is, you can't tell nobody what you're doing. He says, what? I can't tell nobody. He says, no, you can't tell nobody. He says, you got to have humility, right? So it's something that you got to do. You got to do the hard work and the sacrifice, and you don't tell nobody, right? Because you need to have humility when you're doing it. And so he says, well, okay, that's kind of strange, but yeah, okay. Because I really want what's in that box. I can do that. I promise I'll do it. He says, okay. He said, well, what's the last thing I got to do? He said, okay, so if you do all the hard work, if you do the sacrifice, if you do all this with a good heart and have humility, you're going to get that what's in that box. That neighborhood's going to come. He says, but it's just not going to happen in your lifetime. you're not going to get to see it, but you have to have faith. You have to have hope. You know, you have to believe that it's going to happen. And so then Pepito just kind of sits there and he's real quiet, right? He's kind of like, fuck, man, I'm going to do all that work, all those things, and then I'm never going to get to see it. And so the man sits there and he says, well, mijo, you know, now you know what you have to do. And he kind of like pushes the little bag there, right? So Pepito walks out, you know, he walks out of the store. And so I remember hearing this story, right? When I was younger, and I was like in my early 20s, maybe about 24, 25. And it kind of put things into perspective for me when it came to, again, the life path that I choose, not only with the work that I do, but with my family, who I choose to be in society. And so, yeah, I really, really like this story, because we don't know, right? Like, and sometimes maybe Pepito takes the bag and he does it. Or sometimes Pepito doesn't take the bag, you know? But I think, you know, for us, one of the lessons I was taught was that the best community workers are the ones that you don't know, that you don't hear about, because they don't do it for the recognition. They don't do it for the attention. You know, I think about my mom. When my teacher, my maestro, I guess you could call him, Robert Castro, he was my mentor, still is to this day. He taught me a lot, man. And he kind of told me that. He said, you know, the best community workers, the ones nobody knows who they are, because they're not doing it for recognition. They're doing it from the heart. And I think about my mom. She's a paraeducator. She started as a paraeducator when my sister was in kindergarten. As a volunteer, she would volunteer at the school and just stay there. And then they finally hired her on in second grade when my sister was in second grade. And her job was to work with kids that did not speak English. And now my sister is 25, 26. And my mom still, you know, still works at the school. Right now, she's not going to go back because of COVID. But man, my mom has helped hundreds of kids, you know, for over 20 some years of teaching them English and self-esteem and si se puede and like all these beautiful things, right? And I reflect on that and how she fits that example of everything that they say about Pepito, and how, you know, we have so many people like that in our communities, because that's how it's supposed to be. But again, you know, things happen in life and it's just kind of like derailed a lot of our cultural teachings. You know, there's a lot of problems, traumas, things that we haven't been taught, things that they want us to think, that takes us away from who we truly are. So, yeah, man. I feel like I can talk and talk and talk because these are things that I'm passionate about, you know? And I think it's been a while since I've had a chance to really talk about these things. So that's why I'm kind of on a roll right now, man.
It's all good. Um, no, you know, we really do appreciate your time. Um, you know, we really, at least I think I'm pretty sure I can speak for both of us. It's just it given me a lot to think about. Just a lot of just self-reflection that I kind of, and just starting with that question of why, right? Just why, and just asking why to more things. And I think that's kind of why we started this whole thing in the first place, was because we kind of started on the self-discovery path, you know, early in the year, where we were just kind of talking to each other and just trying to figure out why we did things a certain way, or why, you know, because one thing that we discovered was we were raised it very differently, but we've came to the same conclusions at this point in life, that we've shared a lot of similar views. And we're like, so why is that? You know, why do we come from such, you know, such different upbringing, but yet we're still at the same place now? And you know, we've always been very similar people in general. So I think we just started asking more questions, and that's how this whole thought provoking conversation started, was because we wanted to ask more questions. We wanted to just hear more perspectives. We wanted more information because life to us was just trying to find out more, trying to find out who we are as a person, as people, as humans, as just a man, whatever all those labels are, just kind of discover them a little bit more in our own lives. So first of all, I want to say thank you for kind of joining us on this episode, and sharing as much as you did, and showing us your experience, and just, I don't know, I can't really put it into words, just kind of the different emotions and different questions that are kind of swirling in my mind, but just kind of thank you.
For sure, for sure. I mean, it's been good. Like I said, it's our experiences, our life experiences that we have. But my perspective will always be, and I think this is going to be my life teaching. And I'm by no means am I like a maestro, or I don't use like that, right? Like I'm just a like they say, like a common man. I'm just a person, and there's a lot that I'm still learning along the process. Because and I still ask that question, why, and it's going to be going on forever, man. I was talking to my great aunt and uncle, and they're, like I said, they're about 80, and I could tell that that's still, they didn't directly say it, but I'm hearing, and I'm like, man, there's still, that's it's a lifelong learning process. And we're never going to have all the answers at one time, but yeah, we can touch base offline. There's an important book that I will recommend that I think is really important for understanding history of being like, I guess if we think about Mexican history within the United States, and that book is Occupied America. And that's by Rudy Acuna, Dr. Rudy Acuna. And it's like a college history book, to be honest. Um, he's a Chicano studies, and I think he passed away. But he's a professor, and he wrote this history. And some of those history books are really boring in college classes. Dude, I read this book and it's like a thick book, but I read it couldn't put it down. Because it began to, like I said, I read Reign of Gold, I read Roots, and I started to really question why are things happening the way they are. And but that book, Occupied America, kind of gave that perspective of the Mexican side of history. Let me tell you a little bit of history from the Mexican perspective. So it wasn't like a white guy writing history and leaving out important key details or flipping it to be a certain viewpoint. It was from a different view, kind of explaining, which is pretty cool, man. It's a pretty good book that I do. Like I said, I highly recommend it, as starting points. But I know you got something, bro. You're thinking like this. I do that. I put my hand here when I'm thinking. Lately, I've been grabbing the beard. Usually, I don't have a beard. This is the quarantine beard.
The quarantine beard.
Yeah. You see, they only let me grow a mustache, so that's all I got working with. Otherwise, I'd be stroking a beard too. I guess what I really want to start off by saying is, you know what, thank you for sharing your perspective, because it's hearing these narratives, right? These conversations remind me of when I was a little kid and we'd have like Navidad, or we'd have a carne asada, or we'd have like a fiesta, quinceañera, whatever it is, or like something small when we were getting the family together. There would always be the adults sitting around the table, right? And they were just like, it's as if everybody knew, everybody would have their drink, their beverage, their food, whatever it was, and they just start telling stories, right?
Yeah.
and it was just that storytelling that I remember growing up. And when it is un chamaquito, you don't have a space at the table, right? You're just listening, right? That's really what you're doing. You're just listening, and um, you know, having these conversations, remind me of kind of how they passed on wisdom to each other, right? Because although there was a fair share of just like funny stories of like, really stupid moments and mistakes that they made, but at the same time, like embedded in that was this thing that we've been doing for a very, very long time, right? And it's telling stories to each other to learn from each other, right? And I think that's something that's really important. That's something that I've really come to appreciate as I've begun to get a little bit older, right? Begun to see life in a slightly different perspective, um, because it's through these stories that we discover who we are in a way. Because as you're hearing somebody say a story, right? I start reflecting personally. Um, I start reflecting on what are all the moments that are similar to what you're talking about, right? What could I have done differently, right? Reminds me of a specific moment, and I go back to that moment and I experience it again, and I think of like, okay, what are the lessons that I can extract from this, right? And in a way, just by hearing somebody share their story, I'm able to go ahead and discover my own story while at the same time as listening to them and just being able to see um, just another perspective, right? And so that's something that's really incredible. And I think you have been a phenomenal storyteller, just because like of how in depth you went onto specific parts of your story, and then still being able to come back and continue the story where you left off. I kind of start talking circles around sometimes, and Irvin can kind of attest to this. I get a little lost, and he gets lost too. But it's okay. It's one of those things.
Bro, it you're right, that's who we are. We're storytellers, that's how our history, our knowledge was passed down. Sometimes we would have like the codex and there was hieroglyphics, but that's a part of who we are. We have poets, we have philosophers, there is philosophy, there's a way of life that was very beautiful. um, and not as Mel Gibson or whatever his name is shows it in Apocalypto. You know what I mean? We're cutting hearts and cutting heads off, and it's like, man, where they kind of have this perception that they were savages, and it was like, dude, who were the real savages? It was the opposite, man. Who's telling history? They would burn people at the stake. They would chop people's hands off. You know what I mean? There was a lot of very horrible things, which is why I believe the other story I told of La Llorona. Um, and then they make you to believe, right, these false stories. So then you start to believe these things, right? Like, oh, the woman that kills her kids, and it's like, well, hold up, no, man. And we see it today with what's happening, right? You know, well, the police being called and people getting murdered by the police. Well, what's the narrative, right? This man was suspicious, right? It's this man's fault. Why didn't, XYZ? And shit, man, this stuff's been happening for 500 years, man. Uh, it's it's the same cycle that's been happening, and we're fighting it, right? We're still fighting against that. Um, so my thing, and the thing about it is that our families, in some of our families, there's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of traumatic events and experiences that have happened. And that really caused the why, right? I'm going to reflect on why. Well, why is it that, dad is this way or mom was this way? Or why was mom a single parent? Or what happened, what happened, you know, why and what happened to you, to begin to really understand. And what happens is you start to have compassion, you start to have empathy, when you understand why things are the way they are. Um, but and I think oftentimes we kind of laugh about it, man, which is I think again, the mirror, we need to place that mirror in front of it. Um, Being sober, that's important. You know, that was brought to our communities hundreds of years ago. they got people drunk, hooked on drugs, and reservations. People are hooked on meth, right? There's these substances, and it's what does it do? It has a very bad effect on tearing families apart, disconnecting people from themselves. That was one of the first things I was taught was that you need to be sober, right? You need to be in your right mainframe. The moment that you begin to, oh, I just have a couple, but all it takes is a couple, and then something can happen. Um, and I've seen what happens to families, within my own family when people are alcoholics or use drugs or um, nothing positive comes from it, nothing positive. And the kids are the ones that always are affected the most. Um, and those are things that we laugh about. Oh, que mi mama would hit me with the chancla. And it was like, no, like people laugh, but it's like, no, it's not funny, because that wasn't how we were, when we think about it, the Catholic Church would punish people by hitting them, by beating them, by whipping them. Those things would happen, right? Owners and masters would do that to their slaves. So to keep them in order. So I mean, again, there's this idea of let me ask why. Why are these things happening? Because our culture isn't that way. There's a lot of false teachings and false stereotypes. So, but it's a lifelong journey to begin to learn, to relearn, to remember. Yeah, that's what it is we're remembering in our DNA. Um, so, but yeah, bro, I'm sorry, man. I talked and talked and talked, but like I said, I appreciate the being on the show, and I wish you both the best of luck. But we can link up anytime outside of the show. But yeah, man. So it's been a pleasure.
For sure. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I think I'm very excited to kind of just dive into these books and just start reflecting more, and like you said, just start remembering or just start unraveling that thread that of things that I was never exposed to that I wish I would have been. But yeah, just kind of start that journey and see kind of see where it goes. But we kind of kept the people around for quite a while. They're in for a treat in this episode. Yeah, you got any parting words for the people before we head out?
No. Thank you if you guys have made it this far and listening. I think I'll definitely have to come back through and listen to this again, especially to get that Pepito story, just because it I've always heard it in like the little jokes and stuff and like the not serious ones, and
yeah,
there was so like I had to be this age and I had to have lived the life that I've lived so far to be able to respect and understand what that story is. But I'm looking forward to taking that story and sharing it with my kid, right? And just being able to take all these things that I had to get to this point in my life to understand and to think about and reflect on. And but yeah, I'm very excited for that. So once again, thank you.
and to end, I would like to, if I can, just acknowledge again, there's a lot of people I learned from, and I mentioned them throughout the story, but like, that Pepito story was one I heard from a guy named Sammy Nunez, who did a lot of work and to this day does a lot of work in California, Northern California, Stockton area right now. But like I said, Mario Osuna Sanchez, Robert Castro were my first, I guess you could say, mentors when it comes to working in the community and learning about cultura. And it's just kind of, Robert always says, this is a long distance run. It's not like a sprint, and we need long distance runners that are going to be around. And so I take it that way. But yeah, I've been very fortunate. Laura Castro, Yolanda Castro, a lot of people Ana Lilia Soto, that have helped me along the way, and I've learned and listened. That's been an important key factor, was that I would listen. Some people listen, but then they don't hear. So it's a matter of being able to listen and hear at the same time. Or some people hear, but then they don't listen. So it's about finding that balance. But yeah, anytime you guys want to chat, offline, we're good to go. Just we can touch base. So cool.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you all if you stuck around this long. If you had to take a couple times to finish it through, or had to pause it a couple times, that's all right. But I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll catch you guys again next week. Peace out.